Mara Voss had learned, very early in life, that silence was the safest language. She grew up in Greystone Ridge, a small mountain town so tucked away between the pines and the fog that most people who lived an hour away had never heard of it. The roads leading in were narrow, the winters were long, and the people who stayed were either born there or running from somewhere else. Mara was born there. She had no plans to run, not then. Her mother had been a healer, a woman who knew which plants helped a fever break and which roots eased a grieving heart. She died when Mara was 12, quietly and without warning, the way kind people sometimes do. After that, the house changed. Her father changed. He was not a violent man. He was simply a man who had decided that grief was something you poured into a bottle and sealed shut, and he spent the next 6 years doing exactly that. Mara cooked, Mara cleaned, Mara kept herself out of the way and learned how to read a room the way sailors read weather, by watching for the small signs before the storm arrived. By the time she was 18, she had become very good at surviving small storms. She was not prepared for what her father brought home on a cold October evening, wearing his best shirt and a look she had never seen on his face before. His name was Dorian Kael. He was 37, broad-shouldered, and spoke in the kind of low, measured voice that made everything he said sound final. He was the most powerful man in 4 counties, and everyone in Greystone Ridge knew it. He owned land, he owned businesses, he owned the silence that fell over a room whenever he walked into it. Her father introduced him as an important man who had taken an interest in the family. Mara shook his hand and felt something cold move through her that she could not name. Within 3 months, she was living in his estate on the northern ridge, a stone building with iron gates and windows that looked out over the mountain like eyes that never blinked. She had arrived with 1 bag. She had not been asked what she wanted to bring. The first year was confusing more than anything else. Dorian did not shout. He did not threaten. He was, in many ways, perfectly polite. He ensured she was fed, dressed well, and comfortable. But comfort, Mara slowly discovered, can be its own kind of cage. Her phone was replaced with a new one he had set up himself. Her old friends stopped calling after enough canceled plans. She was welcome to go into town, but always with someone he had chosen, and always for a purpose he had approved. When she said she wanted to visit a woman she had grown up with, Dorian looked at her calmly and said there was no real reason for that, was there? And somehow, by the end of that conversation, she had agreed with him, though she could not remember deciding to. That was his particular skill. He did not break people. He quietly rearranged them until they forgot what shape they had been before. By the 2nd year, Mara had stopped recognizing the sound of her own opinions. She would begin a thought and then pause, listening for his reaction before she had even finished speaking. She stopped wearing the color yellow because he had once said it seemed too loud. She stopped laughing at certain things because his expression would go still in a way that made her feel foolish. The first time she tried to leave, she made it as far as the town at the base of the ridge before a car she recognized pulled up beside her. The man inside said nothing to her. He simply drove her back. Dorian was waiting in the hallway. He looked at her for a long moment and then said, very gently, that she must have been confused. That night, her bedroom was moved to the interior of the house. No outside windows. She lay in the dark and tried to remember what her mother's voice had sounded like. She could still picture her face, but the voice was getting harder to hold on to. A woman named Senna came to the estate one spring morning. She was a traveling herbalist, plain and efficient, carrying wooden cases filled with dried plants and small glass bottles. Mara was asked to show her to the storeroom. They worked in silence for a while, cataloging and organizing, and then Senna pressed a small folded note into Mara's hand, as naturally as if she were passing a piece of cloth. Mara did not open it until she was alone in the bathroom with the water running. It said, "There are people who help. The Ridge Road North. Tuesday nights. Leave before the moon is full." She read it 3 times, then she burned it with a candle she kept on the bathroom shelf and watched the ash dissolve under the running water. She waited, she watched. She began studying the small rhythms of the household the way she had once studied weather, the shift changes among the staff, the windows of time when the hallways were quiet, the 11 minutes between the end of the evening kitchen clean and the beginning of the night watch when the back corridor was empty. 11 minutes. She measured it 4 times over 4 separate weeks. What finally moved her was not a single act of cruelty. It was a conversation she was not supposed to hear. She was passing the closed door of Dorian's office when his voice came through clearly, calm, businesslike, discussing arrangements. She heard her own name used once, then she heard the phrase, next arrangement, and understood, with a horrible and sudden clarity, that to him, she had always been temporary. That she was not a person in this house, she was a transaction, and the transaction was nearing its end. She walked to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and made a decision with a stillness that surprised her. She was not going to wait to find out what came next. On a Tuesday, 3 weeks later, she moved. She had spent those weeks collecting small things without appearing to collect anything. A coat from the donation bag meant for the church, the boots from the mudroom that were 2 sizes too large, a small amount of money she had saved from the household allowance, tucked into the lining of an old bag. She packed only what she could carry, without it looking like she was carrying anything at all. She went out through the kitchen corridor during the 11-minute window. She did not run until she was past the iron gate, and then she ran. The pine forest on the north side of the ridge was dark even in early evening, and she had not fully thought through how different it looked without a road under her feet. She moved by direction more than sight, heading north the way the note had described, and for the first 2 hours, she felt something she had almost forgotten. A clean, open feeling in her chest that she eventually recognized as hope. Then the storm came. It arrived without much warning, the way mountain weather sometimes does. The temperature dropped sharply. The wind moved through the pines in a way that sounded almost human. She had been walking for nearly 4 hours when her ankle turned on a wet rock at the edge of a small creek. She went down hard, catching herself on her hands, and sat in the mud for a moment, trying to decide if it was broken. It was not, but it was bad enough that she could not move quickly anymore. The phone she had bought at a gas station 2 towns back, during a supervised trip to town 6 weeks earlier, when she had slipped away for 4 minutes, died in the cold an hour later. She found a shallow overhang of rock, pressed herself into it, and pulled the coat tightly around her body. The cold was the kind that starts in the hands and moves inward slowly, patiently, like it has nowhere else to be. She thought about her mother. She thought about the way the house had smelled when she was a child, herbs and wood smoke and warm bread. She thought, quietly and without drama, that she might not make it to morning. The headlights appeared above her at 2 in the morning. She saw the light first, moving through the trees at the level of the road above, and she did not shout. She had learned, over years, to be careful about who she called out to, but the lights slowed, and then stopped, and a door opened, and she heard footsteps coming down the slope toward her. The man who appeared out of the darkness was not what she expected. He was tall, wearing a worn jacket, with the kind of face that looked like it had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. He had a flashlight in one hand, and an expression of calm focus that suggested he was not frightened and did not intend to be. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "Are you running toward something, or away from something?" She said, "Away." He said, "Good. A way I can work with." His name was Kael Morrow. She learned this later, sitting in the warm back seat of his truck, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like cedar, holding a thermos of coffee that was too strong and too bitter and felt like the best thing she had ever tasted. He drove without speaking much, which she appreciated. When he did speak, he said only what was necessary. He told her where they were going, a safe house, a farmhouse about 40 minutes east. He told her there were other people there. He told her no one would ask her questions that night. He kept every one of those promises. The farmhouse was low and warm, and slightly crowded with things. Books on every surface, 2 large dogs who moved between rooms like they owned the place, and 3 other women who looked at Mara when she arrived, and recognized something in her face that they did not need explained. In the weeks that followed, Mara learned who Kael Morrow actually was. He ran a network, a quiet, careful system of safe houses, legal help, and transport routes that stretched across 4 counties. Nobody advertised it. It worked because the people inside it were serious, and because Kael had spent 15 years building something that was more like a web than an organization. Pull one thread carefully, and the rest held firm. People in the region had started calling it the Lycan Compact, a nickname that had started as a joke about the way the network moved at night and left no trail. Some people called Kael the Lycan King. He reportedly could not stand that name. What he was, in practical terms, was a man who answered his phone at 2 in the morning and drove up ridge roads in storms and asked the right question at the right time. He also handed her an intake form the next morning and explained, in plain language, what kinds of support were available to her and what the legal options looked like and what she was not required to do. He sat across from her at a kitchen table, drank coffee, and spoke to her the way one adult speaks to another, as if her choices belonged to her. That was new. Dorian's people looked for her. She knew they would. There were cars she recognized, twice, parked at the end of streets she didn't know. A message reached her once through a chain she couldn't follow. 3 words, "Come home." "Please." She brought it to Kael. He looked at it, documented it, passed it to the legal team and said, "You don't have to respond to that." She stood there for a moment, just holding the fact of that sentence. "You don't have to." She had not heard those words assembled in that order in a very long time. Dr. Ines Halverson was a therapist connected to the network, a small, precise woman with gray-streaked hair and the rare ability to sit in silence without filling it. Mara began meeting with her twice a week. It was not easy. Talking about what had happened required her to look at it clearly, and looking at it clearly meant admitting how much of herself she had allowed to disappear over those years. "You didn't allow it," Dr. Halverson said, once, quietly. "It was taken. Those are different things." Mara thought about that sentence for weeks. 8 months after she walked out through the kitchen corridor with a bag full of almost nothing, she submitted a recorded statement in a civil proceeding. She did not attend in person. She sat in a room with good light and a glass of water she held in both hands, and spoke clearly into the camera about what had happened to her. She was not the only one. 3 other women came forward the same year. She moved, eventually, to a city 2 provinces away. She rented a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a quiet building. The window in her bedroom faced east and caught the morning light. She took a part-time position at a community pharmacy, the same work her mother had loved, and she enrolled in an evening course on legal advocacy because she had spent enough years watching what happened to people who had no one speaking clearly on their behalf. She and Kael stayed in contact. It was professional at first, updates on the legal proceedings, occasional check-ins about the network's work. Then it became harder to categorize. He was not a dramatic person. He drove an old truck and forgot to eat lunch, and carried something heavy in his eyes that he rarely spoke about. But he answered when she called. He showed up when he said he would. In the context of her life, that was a remarkable thing. A journalist asked her the following year how she felt about being described as a rescue story. Mara was quiet for a moment. "People keep calling it a rescue," she said. "I understand why. But I think about it differently." He stopped the car. He asked the right question. He had a blanket and a thermos and a place to take me. She paused. "But I was the one who left. I was the one who planned for 3 weeks. I was the one who went through that corridor at the right moment and ran through a forest in the dark with a twisted ankle." She looked at the table for a second. He stopped the car. "I still had to get in." She said it simply, without drama, the way she had learned to speak when she finally got her voice back. And then she picked up her coffee and moved on to the next question.